Do you want to cook some fish? Do you want to be like Christ? Do you want Christ-likeness? Then cook some fish. And please, stick with me. You'll see what I mean. I Googled Christ-likeness just to see how many hits. Amazing. Amazing. Way over 1 million. Now, skeptic seeker, you may have never heard of Christ-likeness. And believer, you've heard of it. But I'd bet you'd struggle to define it with anything more than generalities. Now, I decided to make a resolution to strive for more Christ-likeness. I did. But you know what? That's like aiming at fog. And I'm a detail guy, left-brained. So I came up with a list of specific goals. Now, you may think they're oddball, even weird, but I guarantee you this, they'll make you think. And skeptic seeker, this could be an eye-opener about the real Jesus. So here we go, all based on what Christ did. So if you want to be like Christ, shouldn't you want to do the things he did? Now, first, I want to spend more time outside and less time in religious buildings. You know, there's just not much in the four Gospels about Jesus being in religious buildings. And when he was in them, it often didn't go so well. Now, I'm not against church buildings. I'm really not. But the house of God isn't made from bricks and sticks. It's the people. When the people of God gather lakeside or on a hillside, it's just as much the house of God as when they're in a religious building. And second, I want to irritate some religious leaders. I do. Jesus sure did. He irritated them. And they criticized him, challenged him, and plotted to kill him. Part of that was because he called out their hypocrisy and called out their domination of the people, the clergy's domination of the laity. And I want to be angry about the right stuff, but not sin. Anger on its own isn't sin, but uncontrolled or misdirected anger sure can result in sin. We should be righteously angry over the right stuff. In Mark 3, Jesus was. He was angry at the legalistic religious leaders. And he was righteously angry both times he cleansed the temple, driving out the thieving money changers. And, as you might guess, I want to ask thought-provoking questions. Google search told me that Jesus asked 307 questions and answered 183 of them himself. Now, I guess I've got a good start on this one with just a question. And I want to tell stories that make things understandable. Jesus told stories. We call them parables. He told them to illustrate the unknown in terms of the known, the spiritual in terms of the natural. I love a good and meaningful story, and I've learned to use them. And one of my favorites, all-time favorites, is in the justaquestion.org video, How Far Can You See at Night? You know, if you haven't watched that video, just do it for the story. It's really fun. And I want to speak the hard truths. I do. I want to speak the hard truths. Jesus just wasn't Dr. Smiley Face giving suffering people bottles of pain meds. He wasn't trying to make everybody feel good for the moment. He told the hard truths. He challenged his men to obedience. He called sin, sin. He reproved where reproof was needed, corrected where correction was needed. And he proclaimed the true truth of God's grace for the hurting and for the soul sick. And I want to disregard popularity. When the people wanted to make Jesus king, he sent them away. And when Jesus told the hard truths later in John 6, that drove the uncommitted away. And you know, the celebrity pastor phenomenon of today's megachurch sure isn't the way I'd try to be like Jesus. And I want to do the unexpected. Jesus often did the unexpected. He invited himself to dinner at Zacchaeus' house. He defended a woman caught in the actual act of adultery. And he called a tax collector, Levi, Matthew, to be his disciple. And he healed on the Sabbath. And I want to spend some time alone. Jesus did, often to pray alone. And if I've got my earbuds in and music playing, I'm not alone with God, and certainly not praying like I should be. And now Jesus prayed for the things that count for God's kingdom, for the glory of God, and for eternity. I want to pray like that, for the big stuff, the stuff that really matters. And I want to eat with sinners. Jesus was criticized for that, for spending time with the people that needed him. And he was more apt to be with the common sinners than he was with the sanctimonious. And I want to get my hands dirty. Now, I don't mean the going out in the fields to work dirty. I mean the getting close to the people that are physically and spiritually hurting. A Jew of Jesus' day wouldn't even talk to a Samaritan woman, let alone drink anything that she had touched or given to him, but Jesus did. And lepers then were considered physically and ceremonially unclean. But Jesus touched a leper. And he mixed his spit with dirt and put it on a blind man's eyes. You see, in this way, Jesus got his hands dirty. I want to too. And I want to build into a small group of men. You see, Jesus spent most of his time with his men rather than with the crowds. But today we have a crowd count definition of ministry success. And that has led to an American church that can be 2,000 miles wide and 2 inches deep. That wasn't the way of Jesus. He was focused on his men. And I want to celebrate the Lord's Supper in a house. Ever done that? The first century church didn't have buildings and mostly didn't have staff. Communion was celebrated house to house. Even the first communion, the Last Supper, was in the upper room of a house. Why don't we do things like that today? And I want to be a humble servant. Now, I admit, I don't always like being treated like a servant, but that's my problem. But I do want to be a servant like Jesus was. He knelt and washed the disciples' feet before the Last Supper. He even washed the feet of Judas. I remember a time when I knelt before Piotr's feet. It was in Poland. I had a bowl and a cloth in my hands. I took off Peter's sandals and washed his dirty feet. It was humbling to do that. And it was humbling having my feet washed. That's what Christ-likeness feels like. And I want to sleep through storms. Jesus slept through a storm at sea. But I can tell you, I've been in an ocean storm, waves breaking over the bow of the boat. We were making a run for a protected cove. And I can tell you, for me, sleep wasn't an option. But there are storms in my life, other storms. But I'd like to trust God so much that I can sleep every night when the storms break over the bow of my life. And finally, I want to cook some fish. That's it. I want to cook some fish. Shortly before Jesus' ascension, he met his men coming in from fishing. He had started a fire on the shore and was cooking a fish and bread breakfast for them. Can you picture that? Is that the Jesus you're trying to be like? Do my goals sound like a model for Christ-likeness to you? I think some version of them will show up in our lives if we're seeking to be like the real Jesus. And you see, Jesus wasn't some megachurch preaching CEO. He was God who became the God-man. He was fully man blended with undiminished deity. Paul's instructions in Philippians 2 describe him well. Listen to this description of Jesus. It's in Paul's instructions. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in the likeness of men, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Jesus was the humble servant who cooked some fish. That's the Jesus I want to be like. Do you want to cook some fish? I do. I'm John Morris. and this is just a question.